Hello, welcome to Waypoint Survival. Today, we're going to talk about how to dress like a hobo from the 1930s. Stay tuned. The era of the hobo began sometime after the American Civil War, in the late 1860s on into the 1870s. There were a lot of young men who were very capable of working, but there weren't any jobs available in many parts of the South in particular. And so, since the trains were already going there, they would get on the trains and they would travel to wherever they could find work. Many of them were honest, hardworking, and reliable, and some of them even followed the harvest, as a lot of modern migrants do today. The word hobo is of unknown etymology. They were traveling people, men and women, who went from place to place looking for work, and often they did have a home. They were just traveling to find work, so they weren't exactly homeless or houseless, as a lot of people think of modern-day hobos. There's three basic sources where we think the word hobo came from. Either from the words homeward bound, taking the first two letters of each word. It could also refer to as a hoe boy, which they would often carry their hoes and travel from place to place to hoe the corn and to work for local farmers or those who were far away. As I said, they often, like modern migrants, would follow the harvest. The term hobo may have also come from a railroad greeting that was very common back in the day. Men were often referred to as beaux, and so instead of saying hi as we would today, they would often say ho. And if it was another man they were addressing, it would be ho, beau. Of course, you can see how easily that became a hobo, a greeting for someone who was traveling along the rails. The clothing that the hobo wore had to be durable and functional. It also had to be relatively cheap and available. Remember, these were not wealthy people. It's why they were traveling on the rails, because it was cheap and because they needed to go someplace to find work. So the clothes that they used were invariably the ones that they had. Remember, this is the Depression era, in the 1930s, and people didn't have sometimes more than one change of clothes. So what they had would be more like our work clothes, something that we would think would be very durable out in the fields for travel. And of course, they would try to keep them clean as much as possible. However, traveling behind a steam train in the days of coal was a dirty job, and often they had to ride in coal cars. And that also, of course, gave them dirty faces and hands, and it was difficult to stay clean, for sure. An item of utmost importance to the hobo of that era would have been his hat. Remember that men back in those days did not go around bareheaded. It was considered very poor taste. It also would help keep the head warm, and in various kinds of weathers could even keep you dry. Of course, most hobos could not afford to go to a proper hat maker and have their hats fixed and repaired, so once they got wet, the brims would be floppy and it would lose most of its shape, although still retained a little bit of its former glory. Simple hat band, maybe of no uncertain maker, but just a proper felt hat made, of course, from wool felt that would serve in many kinds of weathers. This is a very important part of the hobo's attire. A sturdy pair of shoes was of utmost importance, something with a tall ankle on it to support the ankle, made from leather, very common material, of course, back then. They didn't have a lot of synthetics, and this would be used to be polished up, could be oiled to keep them somewhat waterproof for bad weather, also sturdy enough to walk in and work in, so a sort of an all-around item. Along with the sturdy shoes would be a good pair of socks and perhaps an extra pair. You could use these for mittens or gloves if you didn't have any. They also often use a sock, clean one hopefully, to boil their coffee grounds in to make hobo coffee. The coat would be a sturdy work coat made from a duck cotton. Has some pockets for the hands, and then also some larger flat pockets that fasten with a button to store needed supplies in. And when you went to your job, maybe a sandwich or whatever you'd be provided with lunch for the day. This particular jacket is made by Roundtree in York, and it's just a jacket that I picked up at a secondhand store. Nice plaid interior, nice collar, and just a vintage type jacket that works well into the hobo era. A sturdy leather belt would be an important part of keeping his trousers up. And of course, a good pair of suspenders to help hold things up when he was traveling around. Something that would hold his pants up. Again, hobos might not always get a whole lot of food, and so their clothes would get baggy and loose as they would travel, and so suspenders were a very important part of a man's attire, and of course a lot of men wore them in general anyway. The shirt is a simple Cherokee brand shirt. It's long sleeved. Remember, long sleeves were the style of the day. Would also protect you from cinders from the train, also briars and bugs and things like that. Extra protection from the wind and getting wind chapped riding on the train for long hours, and it was just something that they generally did anyway. During the 1930s, the Depression era, if you look at any of the photos from that day, most people were very well dressed, and so long sleeves was the order of the day, and it was very common to see men wear this. They would roll them up in case they had to work, and that was just the way that they did it. But this would be a common type shirt for that time period. The pants would just be common work pants, rolled up at the cuffs, and then in the pockets you would carry things that you would need for the day. For instance, Hobo would carry a comb so he could stay groomed. He would also carry his folding blade, and then he might also carry some matches depending on what he was doing and what he needed. There would also be all kinds of other things that they would carry, perhaps a fishing kit. I've showed you the little tin that has various items in it. They could carry it in another pocket if they wished. But there's a lot of items depending on the skill level and what they wanted to take with them. Now, in colder weather, a hobo might want to have a pair of coveralls. And of course, coveralls were very common back in the day. And if you could get them insulated, so much the better. And it would be a tough cotton duck canvas, of course, that would help provide protection climbing in and out of rail cars, as well as just the rough and tumble life that a hobo might have to live. Also, along with his coveralls, he might carry a pair of fingerless gloves. That would be very handy for keeping the hands warm but still allow some dexterity. They would also be interested in carrying a knit cap if they could get a hold of one. Something, of course, that would keep the head warm riding on the train, sleeping in the rail cars, or even in the hobo jungle. This was a very common thing. A lot of people wore these. Knit caps have been around for hundreds of years, and so this would be something else that he might carry to keep himself warm. This is James Bender for Waypoint Survival. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up. Also, make sure and check out the links in the description box below, just under the More button. And while you're down there, you'll also find our waypointsurvival.com link. And this is where you can sign up to take survival and bushcraft classes at our beautiful training facility in Southern Ohio. And if you haven't already done so, please subscribe to the channel. We'd really appreciate it. And when you do subscribe, make sure and press that bell button so that you can stay notified of all of our upcoming videos. And we'll talk to you next time.